One big question for you today. Have the Democrats lost their minds? I ask you this in all seriousness, and I hope you'll put aside any partisan thoughts until you watch this video. Because in the last 48 hours, I've heard everybody from President Joe Biden all the way down the line call proposed changes to voter law in Texas things like the most significant test since the Civil War, to Jim Crow 2.0, Jim Eagle, just flat out racist. I've heard all of these things. And they seem to me to be totally and completely disconnected from any realistic look at what is actually proposed in Texas. So what is proposed? I'm going to tell you that in one moment. But first, let's listen to some of that rhetoric so you can see how performative all of this is. It is a stage show designed to convince you of something that I don't think is true. And we'll see if I can prove it to you. Here is the President of the United States of America talking about this very serious problem, this threat to democracy that we need to be very worried about.
The assault on free and fair elections is just such a threat, literally. I've said it before. We're facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. That's not hyperbole.
That's not only hyperbole, it's the actual definition of hyperbole. It's really just by the letter, the definition of hyperbole to say that these proposed changes to voting laws, and we'll talk about the two bills again in a second, are the most significant test since the Civil War, when this country was ripped in half in a battle over slavery. Obviously, the comparisons are race-based, but is any of the actual voting bill race-based? We'll see.
Since the Civil War.
Since the Civil War.
The Confederates...
You think anything can happen after that?
...never breached the Capitol, as insurrectionists did on January the 6th.
He's tying it to the Capitol attack now.
I'm not saying this to alarm you. I'm saying this because you should be alarmed.
I'm saying this because you should be alarmed. Our democracy is at stake here. If you're not mad, you're not paying attention. He even said, look, my Republican friends, you got to get in on this. Have you no shame?
We'll be asking my Republican friends in Congress and states and cities and counties to stand up for God's sake.
Stand up.
And help prevent this concerted effort to undermine our election and the sacred right to vote.
Concerted effort to undermine elections and the sacred right to vote. Woo, this is bad stuff. So what's actually in these proposed laws in Texas, or these proposed bills that would change the way voting works? Well, let's go over here. This is NBC DFW. That's NBC in Dallas-Fort Worth. Hardly some partisan news outlet, right? And they talk about how dozens of Texas House Democrats fled the state Monday in an attempt to stop the GOP's sweeping elections bills that would restrict vote by mail, eliminate drive-through and 24-hour voting, and empower poll watchers. Those are the three big fronts. We're going to be talking about two bills. There's other bills being thrown around, but these are the two ones that are important. House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 1. They were filed in the legislature's special session called by the governor, who is Greg Abbott, last week. When this happened, the Democrats walked out to do something called breaking quorum, and that means that business kind of stops. There's even threats to arrest them. This has been done before, where Republicans fled the state. Happened in Oregon not that long ago. And this happens back and forth between political parties. So now let's talk about the contentious issues here. This is supposed to be the biggest problem the country's faced since the Civil War, so it should be pretty obvious. Now, voting by mail, what will change as a result of these proposed bills? Again, they haven't gone through, but the proposed bills. With the new proposed ID requirements for voting by mail, voters would have to provide their driver's license number or the last four digits of their social security number on their applications for a mail-in ballot. Then, in order for the ballot to be accepted and verified, voters would have to include matching information on the envelope used to return their ballot. Seems pretty simple to me. If you believe that you should have to at least do something to prove that you're an eligible voter, then it's not a really big hurdle to hop over to provide your driver's license number or the last four digits of your social security number. Also, these things are not hard to get, despite how people like to pretend that this is really, really difficult. Nobody out there, and I think Kamala Harris, the vice president, said last week, these people don't have access to Xerox machines. They can't get these identifications. Of course they can, and this is not a big hurdle to voting. This is not Jim Crow. This is certainly not Jim Crow 2.0, whatever that is, and it's certainly nowhere near what we were facing as a country during the Civil War. There is also a proposal to block elections officials from sending unsolicited mail-in ballot applications. This is coming after Harris County tried to send more than 2 million registered voters these mail-in ballot applications ahead of the presidential election. Now, in that case, they were blocked by the Texas Supreme Court, and the House bill would make it a felony to send unsolicited applications as a result of that court ruling. Currently, Texas allows voters who are 65 and older, are sick or disabled, will be out of the country on Election Day and during the period for early voting, are confined in jail or otherwise eligible to vote by mail. To verify those ballots, Texas uses a signature matching process. So it is not as if there is no matching or anything else going on. It's just that the matching is changing from your signature to your driver's license number or the last four of your social. It doesn't seem crazy to me. Let me know if you think that's out of line in the comments. Here's the next part of it. So this is part two of the three issues that lead us to the Civil War and Jim Crow. Partisan poll watcher protections. Both the House and Senate bills would also give partisan poll watchers greater access to voters in polling places. Under current law, watchers are entitled to sit or stand conveniently near election workers in polling places. But both bills would give watchers free movement, while also making it a criminal offense to obstruct the view of the poll watcher or distance the poll watcher while they make an observation not reasonably effective. This simply is an annoyance. And I will concede that if you were a poll worker, to have partisan election officials is not an ideal thing. But it is hardly Jim Crow or Jim Crow 2.0 or the Civil War. This seems very, very easy to understand to me, and I'm sure you're probably nodding your head right along. The last issue, drive-through voting and 24-hour voting bans. Now, Harris County had some attempts to widen voting access last year, and that is a target of these two bills as well. Both bills would ban the type of drive-through voting used at 10 polling places in Harris County in last year's presidential election. It will also ban 24-hour voting at polling places used on specific days at particular polling places in Harris County. These were things that were never meant to be permanent. These were things that the folks in Harris County were not authorized to do. But these are things that happened because of the pandemic and to make it a little easier for people to access voting, either early voting or otherwise. Now, these had never been done before, so to go back to what was happening the year prior or the election prior is not Jim Crow, it's not Jim Crow 2.0, and it's certainly not the Civil War. Now, as for early voting hours, these two bills would actually expand on early voting hours, believe it or not. It makes you feel like you're living in an ulterior universe, right? Like, what is happening here? How could these people be so passionately saying that this is the end of democracy with this being what the proposed changes are? Early voting hours would be regulated in both the bills, adding an extra hour required early voting hours for local election, but preventing expanded early voting hours. The House bill would set the hours from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., Senate bill 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. This is a lot of time to vote. The Wall Street Journal chimes in on this. They say of these bills, this is not a blockade of the ballot box. To the contrary, in some places, the bill would expand mandatory early voting hours. Current law, follow me here. Current law says in the final week before the election, counties with 100,000 people must open their main polling place for 12 hours on weekdays and 5 hours on Sunday. The House would lower that from counties with 100,000 people to counties with 55,000 people. So more early voting there. The Senate would bring that all the way down to 30,000 people. More early voting there. Male voters would be asked to verify their identities by supplying a state ID number or the last four digits of a social. That way, election workers could quit squinting at people's signatures. Follow this. A study of Georgia in 2008 found that 54% of the ballots rejected for signature or oath issues were from black voters. Under the Texas plan, if the ID numbers matched on both sides, the voter's signature would be presumed valid. In fact, it seems that the status quo is a more direct negative impact on black voters in the state of Texas if you just use your brain for a moment and think about this. Now, over to Vox very quickly before I give you some other comments on this and the Democrats who fled the state. Even Vox admits that this is not nearly as bad as pitched. Here's what they say. The bills would make it harder for election officials to remove partisan poll watchers sent by political campaigns, and the Senate bill could impose a draconian array of civil and criminal penalties on election officials, political campaigns, and even individual volunteers who commit fairly minor violations of the state's election law. This is them trying to see into the future. They say the short answer to what's going to happen here is there are two versions of the bill, both modest compared to some GOP voting proposals, though both still worrisome. Both the House and Senate versions of the bill would add new restrictions to Texas' already restricted laws governing absentee voting. They are not the most restrictive on absentee voting. There are many other states run by Democrats that aren't even being discussed in this as if there's some sort of great Democratic undoing going on. They would also prevent drive-through polling sites and innovation that some Texas counties use during the pandemic to protect voter health. All right, there you go. So the Texas Democrats, they flee the state and they say, look at us, and they smile for a bunch of photos, and they're doing a press tour. They're getting publicity. They're fundraising. They're being politicians, which is why I hate all politicians. It really is just, it gets right into the core of me. Here's another one of them. This is Gene Wu. He's a Texas state representative from District 137. He says, my first meal as a fugitive, delicious. Actually, he says my fist meal as a fugitive, but you get the point. And then over to John Rosenthal, who's Texas State Representative District 135, and he sends over his legislative director, and she's going to tell you just how bad all this stuff is. Jim Crow 2.0, baby, Jim Eagle.
House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 1 aim to restrict access to voting and intimidate voters at the polls by creating new criminal penalties for doing things as simple as helping somebody fill out their mail-in ballot and allowing partisan poll watchers at the polls intimidate voters, but making it a criminal penalty to remove those poll watchers when they are intimidating voters.
Wow, she did a lot of work with those words there. This allows partisan poll watchers, which I did say was annoying, to intimidate these people. It does none of the sort. You can still enforce rules at your polling place. There's just going to be something in these bills that requires you to allow somebody to watch everything that's going down inside the polling place. It's all doom and gloom. The end is nigh, but there's never any real evidence of what the hell is happening.
These bills perpetuate a dangerous lie that there is a ton of fraud happening all over the United States, that the election was stolen, and that there's a lot of fraud in Texas. But research shows you are more likely to be struck by lightning or hit by a meteor than to find a valid case of voter fraud in Texas.
Oh, man. Really? More likely to be struck by lightning or hit by a meteor. Voter fraud, Texas arrest. I don't want to get hit by a meteor. I know that. I definitely don't want to deal with that. Texas arrests man for alleged illegal voting. That's Ken Paxton, the Attorney General. Texas man Hervis Rogers arrested on charges he voted while he wasn't supposed to be in the Democratic primary while under parole. They made an arrest, the election fraud unit. I mean, I'm seeing things from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and it's not as hard as getting hit by a meteor or struck by lightning. The fact is, they're not wrong. And when Democrats say that there is very little overall election fraud in this country, that's true. You know what else is true? You're way overstating your case, man. When you have the president going out and comparing what I just told you to the Civil War or to Jim Crow, have you lost your minds? Do you not care about the truth any longer? Are you willing to abandon all principles just to bury your opponents at all costs? There's worry, and genuine worry, about folks on the right getting people who support them to lose faith in the electoral system. And that's actively happening. But you know how to repeat that on the other side of the aisle? Doing this right here is how you repeat that. What do you think about the Democrats' reaction? Is it in line with what the proposed changes actually say? Those of you who agree with this, I'd love to hear from you. Make your case. What about this is so egregious that it's comparable to the Civil War? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading those and talking back and forth with you. If you're new around here, please give the page a follow and share this post if you want your friends to know what's going on. I'd appreciate that. Facebook.com/The News Junkie. Hit that follow button over there or subscribe at YouTube.com/The News Junkie. I appreciate you watching, and I'll talk to you again real soon.